When the king of late-night television passed away, there was no funeral, no grand Hollywood ceremony, no line of black cars, and no public gathering where the world could say goodbye. Yet, in the silence that followed his death, one name echoed louder than all the rest, a name belonging to someone no one expected. It was a ghost from a past he had long tried to forget. Who was this person, and why did their story haunt the final chapter of Johnny Carson's life? On January 23, 2005, the man who had tucked America into bed for 3 decades was gone. Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late-night television, died quietly at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The official cause was respiratory failure, brought on by the emphysema he had been battling for years. He was 79 years old. His nephew, Jeff Sotz, issued a brief and heartfelt statement. He was surrounded by his family, whose loss would be immeasurable. There would be no memorial service. This decision surprised many, yet it was entirely in keeping with who Johnny was. Though he lived in the spotlight, performing for millions every night, Carson was an intensely private man. His close friend and fellow talk show host, Dick Cavett, once recalled how awkward Carson could be in social situations, how difficult it was for him to engage in even small talk with fans outside the studio. Ed McMahon, his loyal sidekick for 30 years, famously said, "Johnny was comfortable in front of 20 million people and completely uncomfortable in front of 20. Many called him the most private public man in history. In death, he finally found the peace and privacy he had always wanted. His body was cremated, and his ashes were given to his wife, Alexis Moss. There was no public memorial, no gathering for friends or colleagues to share memories. The man whose final show drew an audience of 50 million left this world quietly, with only a few witnesses present. The world mourned him in silence. Tributes poured in from across the nation. President George W. Bush remembered him as a steady and reassuring presence. Jay Leno, who succeeded him on The Tonight Show, called him the gold standard. David Letterman, the man Carson had privately considered his true heir, gave the most emotional tribute of all. All of us who came after are pretenders. We will not see the likes of him again." Fans left flowers and letters on his Hollywood Walk of Fame star and at Johnny Carson Park, just across from the NBC studios where he had made magic for decades. But if there was no funeral, how could there be a guest? And among the countless people he had known and the few enemies he had made, whose name whispered in the wake of his death could have stunned everyone, the answer wasn't about who showed up, but who hadn't been there for a very long time. The guest was not a person, but the haunting memory of a friendship so close and a betrayal so painful that it changed both their lives forever. It was the story of the one person Johnny Carson could never forgive. To understand the end, we have to go back to the beginning. Before she became a household name, Joan Rivers was just another struggling comedian. In the early 1960s, she spent years performing in tiny clubs in New York's Greenwich Village, often passing around a hat that came back nearly empty. She slept in her car, worked temp jobs to make ends meet, and was even banned from Jack Parr's version of The Tonight Show after just one appearance. She auditioned for Carson's Tonight Show 7 times and failed every single one. By 1965, at only 31 years old, many in the business were telling her she was finished. Then came the night of February 17th, 1965. It was a mercy booking, something her manager arranged as a favor, because he also represented Bill Cosby. Rivers walked on to that stage thinking it would be her last shot, but something extraordinary happened. She later said, "It was one of those nights where everything goes right, the stars are in alignment, and the audience, we just connected. She wasn't just funny, she was electric, and the one person who truly mattered saw it. When her set ended and she joined Johnny on the couch, he leaned in and said the words that would change her life forever. 'You're going to be a star.'" Rivers was stunned. She even looked behind her, wondering if he was talking to someone else. She later described the chemistry between them as magical. In that moment, a powerful bond was formed. Carson didn't just give her a career break, he became her mentor, her biggest supporter. As she would often say, he handed me my career. From that moment on, Joan Rivers became a regular on The Tonight Show, appearing nearly 100 times over the next 20 years. Their on-screen chemistry was legendary. He was the calm, composed king of late night. She was the sharp, witty court jester who could make him laugh until tears rolled down his face. Carson's belief in her was genuine. When Rivers launched her own short-lived daytime talk show in 1968, Johnny Carson was her very first guest, a massive gesture of support. Her importance on The Tonight Show continued to grow. She became Carson's trusted substitute whenever he was away, and by 1983, she was officially named the show's permanent guest host. It was a position of enormous honor and responsibility. When Johnny was gone, she ruled the kingdom. To the world, she was the heir apparent, the queen in waiting. Her loyalty to him was unwavering. She later revealed that she had turned down multiple offers to host her own talk show because she didn't want to leave The Tonight Show. But this is where everything changed. Despite their apparent warmth on television, Joan Rivers and Johnny Carson's relationship was almost entirely professional. It thrived under the glare of the studio lights and in front of the cameras. As Rivers herself once wrote, "Our friendship existed entirely on camera in front of America. And even then, during the commercial breaks, when the red light went off, we had nothing to say to each other." Their silence wasn't rooted in dislike, but rather in Carson's legendary aloofness. He was a man known for keeping his distance, building walls around himself. Their bond was never that of close friends confiding in one another. Instead, it was a relationship defined by hierarchy. Carson was the king, the benefactor who had discovered Rivers and given her a place in his court. This unspoken power dynamic would later become the key to understanding the painful betrayal that followed. By the mid-1980s, Rivers began to sense instability in her career. For years, she had felt secure as Carson's trusted number two, but that confidence began to waver. In 1985, Carson renewed his contract with NBC for 2 years, while Rivers was only offered a single-year extension. To her, the message was obvious. "It could only mean one thing," she wrote. "The powers were uncertain about my future." Soon after, a memo circulated through NBC listing potential successors for Carson once he retired. Having filled in as guest host more than anyone besides Johnny himself, Rivers expected her name to top the list. But when she finally saw it, she was crushed. Her name wasn't there at all. She came to a painful realization. NBC would never allow a woman to host The Tonight Show. To her guest hosting duties were merely a way for the network to use her talent without ever viewing her as a legitimate successor. At that vulnerable moment, a new opportunity presented itself. A young network called Fox was preparing to launch and wanted to make a major statement. Its executives, including Barry Diller, offered Rivers her own late-night show, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. It would air at the exact same time as The Tonight Show, directly competing with her mentor. The deal was lucrative, a $10 million contract, far more than she earned at NBC. Rivers faced an agonizing choice: stay loyal to Johnny, the man who made her career, or seize a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity after feeling dismissed by the network he represented. Her husband and manager, Edgar Rosenberg, advised her to remain silent about the deal until the contract was finalized. His reasoning was cold but practical. Others who had left The Tonight Show for rival programs were immediately blacklisted. If she told Johnny and the deal fell through, she could end up with nothing. Worse, they feared Carson's immense influence could end the deal before it even began. So she kept quiet, a decision she would regret forever. Just before the official announcement, the news leaked. What happened next depends on whose story you believe, as two completely different accounts emerged. According to Rivers, she was devastated that Carson heard the news secondhand. She immediately tried to call him to explain. When she finally reached him and told him about the new show, he said nothing, then hung up. Thinking the call had dropped, she tried again, but he hung up on her a second time. That was the end of their relationship. They would never speak again. Carson, however, told a very different story. He claimed that call never happened and said he found out about her Fox show through a press release, just like everyone else. Feeling blindsided and betrayed by someone he had supported for over 2 decades, Carson cut her off completely. Many wondered why Carson reacted so harshly. Other male comedians had left to start their own shows, and while there was sometimes tension, he had often given them his blessing. Rivers believed his anger stemmed from something deeper than professional rivalry. "I think he really felt because I was a woman that I just was his. That I wouldn't leave him," she later wrote. "He didn't like that as a woman. I went up against him." In Carson's world, a man leaving to compete was seen as ambition. A woman leaving was viewed as betrayal. To him, the king had been defied, and his revenge would be swift and devastating. Carson, one of the most powerful figures in television, used his influence to make Rivers' professional life as difficult as possible. The first and most immediate consequence was her permanent ban from The Tonight Show. For the rest of Carson's career, and even years after his retirement, Rivers was unwelcome in the studio that had once felt like home. But the fallout didn't stop there. Carson's team created what amounted to a blacklist. Anyone who appeared as a guest on The Late Show starring Joan Rivers would no longer be invited to The Tonight Show. For celebrities and their agents, the choice was simple: appear on a struggling new network or the most prestigious show in television history. Most chose Carson. As a result, Rivers struggled to attract top guests. An NBC executive and personal friend even told her bluntly, "We are going to destroy you." The Late Show premiered on October 9, 1986, but almost immediately ran into problems. Without major celebrity guests and facing the overwhelming dominance of Carson's Tonight Show, Rivers' program struggled to survive behind the scenes. The situation grew even worse. Joan Rivers' husband, Edgar, who worked as a producer on her show, was constantly at odds with the Fox executives. Within less than a year, the network presented Joan with a harsh ultimatum: fire her husband or lose the show. She refused to betray him, and in May 1987, Fox dismissed them both. The professional humiliation was overwhelming, but what followed was even more devastating. The failure of the show, the heavy debts they accumulated, and the very public collapse of their careers placed unbearable pressure on their marriage. Just 3 months after they were fired, Edgar Rosenberg tragically took his own life. In the darkest period of her existence, Joan Rivers was completely alone. Her career lay in ruins, her husband was gone, and from the man who had once been her greatest ally, Johnny Carson, there was only silence. He never called, never sent a note, and never offered a single word of condolence. That silence turned their feud from a typical Hollywood fallout into something much darker and profoundly tragic. It exposed a hidden side of Carson, one his loyal audience never saw, a man whose resentment ran so deep it eclipsed compassion or human decency. Rivers later described her isolation with painful clarity, saying, "It was like Stalin had sent me to Siberia." The king of late night had spoken, and his judgment was final. Fast forward to a quiet day in January 2005. When the news of Johnny Carson's death spread, the memory of his bitter, unresolved feud with Joan Rivers was among the first things people recalled. She became the ghost that lingered over his legacy, the one unfinished story the master of control could never close. With no public funeral for Carson, her story became the unspoken eulogy. Joan was, in a sense, the unexpected guest at his farewell. Her reaction to his passing was as conflicted as their history, not a simple expression of grief, but a complex mix of hurt, bitterness, and lingering admiration. In one interview, she didn't hold back, calling Carson a mean son of a... Yet in the same breath, she acknowledged him as the most brilliant straight man ever. Nobody touches him. The pain remained raw even after 2 decades of silence. She never expressed regret for accepting the Fox opportunity, but she did mourn the lost chance for reconciliation. In one of her final interviews, she imagined how their story could have ended differently. "What Johnny should have done," she said. "After the whole thing, after I left the show, after I was fired from Fox, and after Edgar committed suicide, Johnny should have had me back on the show and said, 'Where you been?' It would have made all the papers. We could have picked right up. It would have been a moment of forgiveness. A classy move from the classiest man on television. But that moment never came. Even years after his death, Rivers continued to seek closure. In an episode of her reality series Joan and Melissa, Joan Knows Best, she visited the cemetery where Carson's ashes were kept. Cameras followed her as she stood over his resting place, speaking into the empty air. A final, heartbreaking attempt to make peace with the man who had erased her from his life. This is why Joan Rivers became the true guest at Johnny Carson's funeral. While he withdrew into a private, silent world after retiring in 1992, refusing to ever speak publicly about their feud, she had to carry its weight under the spotlight. For years, she became the sole storyteller of their fractured friendship, sharing her pain in interviews and on stage because his side of the story was forever left unsaid. At the time of Carson's death, it was her voice and her heartbreak that echoed most loudly through his legacy. The unexpected guest wasn't someone standing at a graveside, but the haunting memory of the woman he had elevated, then abandoned, and ultimately refused to forgive. In the end, Johnny Carson got the quiet exit he always desired. There was no public memorial, no spectacle, just silence. But that silence was filled with the story of the one person he could never forgive. The true guest at the end of his life was not a person at all, but a memory. The memory of a friendship that began with a single sentence and ended with the click of a phone. It stood as a final, silent testament to the unwavering loyalty he demanded and the heavy, unforgivable cost of betrayal in the court of the king of late night.